I never thought I'd be sitting here telling folks I married my 15-year-old student. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will leave you speechless. Truth is, that headline only tells a sliver of what actually happened, and Lord knows, half-truths can be more damaging than outright lies. It was 1955 when I first met Marcus. I was teaching at the colored school in Oak Ridge, Georgia. That's what we called it back then. I was just 27, already trapped in a loveless marriage to Harold, the hardware store owner. Harold was 15 years older, from one of those families everybody respected, but nobody really liked. Our marriage had been more of a business arrangement than a love match. My daddy owed his daddy money, and I was pretty enough to make a suitable wife. That's how things worked in small southern towns back then. Women like me didn't have many choices. I remember sitting on my front porch that hot August afternoon, fanning myself and grading papers when Principal Jenkins drove up in his dusty Buick. "Miss Evelyn," he said, removing his hat, "got a new student needs some extra help. Boy's smart as a whip, but behind in his studies. His family just moved here from Alabama." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Extra tutoring meant extra money, and Harold controlled our finances so tight I had to account for every penny I spent on stockings. Marcus showed up on my porch the next day after school, clutching a worn composition book and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Skinny as a rail, with serious eyes that seemed to take in everything. I offered him a glass of sweet tea, and he looked surprised, like nobody'd ever shown him such a simple kindness before. "Ma'am," he said, so formal it nearly broke my heart, "I ain't looking for charity. My mama says I gotta learn proper if I'm gonna make something of myself." His accent was deep Alabama, musical almost, but I could hear the determination underneath. I still remember that first lesson. The boy couldn't write a proper sentence, but he could do complex arithmetic in his head faster than I could on paper. "Who taught you numbers?" I asked. "Nobody taught me," he said. "Just comes natural when you're counting cotton." The way he said it, matter of fact, no self-pity, told me everything I needed to know about what kind of person he was. Those tutoring sessions became the highlight of my week. Harold didn't mind. "Charitable work looks good for the store," he'd say, not bothering to look up from his newspaper. 3 afternoons a week, Marcus would appear on my porch, and we'd work through English, history, science. The boy soaked up knowledge like the parched Georgia clay soaks up rain. Things weren't easy for him at school. The other children were cruel, called him names, mocked his Alabama accent, his second-hand clothes. One day, he showed up with a split lip. "Fell down," he mumbled when I asked. I knew better, but I also knew pushing wouldn't help. Instead, I lent him my copy of Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. When he returned it 2 weeks later, his eyes had a new fire in them. "Miss Evelyn," he said, "I'm going to be a doctor someday. Don't matter what nobody says." I believed him. That's the thing. I really, truly believed him, when nobody else did. Not even his mama, who loved him fierce, but couldn't imagine such dreams coming true. Not in the South. Not in 1955. Not for a boy with skin the color of coffee. For 2 years, those tutoring sessions continued. Marcus advanced 3 grade levels in reading. He devoured every book I could get my hands on. I smuggled textbooks from the white school when I could. Their cast-offs were still better than anything the colored school had. I taught him Latin roots for medical terms. He taught me about perseverance. Then came that awful spring day in '57 when everything changed. Marcus wasn't on my porch at our usual time. Instead, his mama appeared, eyes red from crying. "Mr. Jackson been killed," she said, her voice hollow. "Tractor accident at the Wilkins farm." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Marcus's father, gone. Just like that. "Marcus says to tell you he can't come for lessons no more. We can't keep the rent without his daddy's pay. Moving in with my sister in Macon." I ran inside and grabbed every book I could find, plus $20 from my secret emergency fund hidden in my sewing basket. When I pressed it into her hands, she tried to refuse. "It's not charity," I insisted. "It's an investment in your boy's future." She finally took it, her dignity intact. The last book I gave her was a medical dictionary I'd been saving for Marcus's birthday. Inside I wrote, "Your future is waiting for you out there. Never stop learning." It was signed, Miss Evelyn. And just like that, Marcus was gone from my life. I never got to say goodbye. I pictured him riding in the back of some pickup truck, headed to Macon, all his belongings in a cardboard suitcase, dreams temporarily derailed by the harsh realities of life. The years passed. Harold drank more, talked less. I kept teaching, finding other students with potential, but none quite like Marcus. Sometimes I'd wonder what became of him. Had he managed to continue his education? Had life beaten the dreams out of him? In my lowest moments, I feared he'd ended up another statistic, another bright light snuffed out by a world that didn't want to see colored boys succeed. In 1968, Harold died of liver failure. I was 42, childless, and finally free. The neighbors all expected me to wear black and fade into respectable widowhood. Instead, I cut my hair, applied for the position of school principal, and scandalized the town by wearing bright colors to church. For the first time in my life, I answered to no one but myself. Little did I know, somewhere out there, a young man still carried my words with him. A young man who would one day return and turn my carefully constructed life upside down in ways I never could have imagined. But that's getting ahead of myself. Life has its own timing, and some seeds take decades to bloom. Block 1. Emotional American Introduction, 1,000 words. I never thought I'd be sitting here telling folks I married my 15-year-old student. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will leave you speechless. Truth is, that headline only tells a sliver of what actually happened. And Lord knows, half-truths can be more damaging than outright lies. It was 1955 when I first met Marcus. I was teaching at the colored school in Oak Ridge, Georgia. That's what we called it back then. I was just 27, already trapped in a loveless marriage to Harold, the hardware store owner. Harold was 15 years older, from one of those families everybody respected, but nobody really liked. Our marriage had been more of a business arrangement than a love match. My daddy owed his daddy money, and I was pretty enough to make a suitable wife. That's how things worked in small southern towns back then. Women like me didn't have many choices. I remember sitting on my front porch that hot August afternoon, fanning myself and grading papers, when Principal Jenkins drove up in his dusty Buick. "Miss Evelyn," he said, removing his hat. "Got a new student, needs some extra help. Boy's smart as a whip but behind in his studies. His family just moved here from Alabama." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Extra tutoring meant extra money, and Harold controlled our finances so tight I had to account for every penny I spent on stockings. Marcus showed up on my porch the next day after school, clutching a worn composition book and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Skinny as a rail, with serious eyes that seemed to take in everything. I offered him a glass of sweet tea, and he looked surprised, like nobody'd ever shown him such a simple kindness before. "Ma'am," he said, so formal it nearly broke my heart, "I ain't looking for charity. My mama says I gotta learn proper if I'm gonna make something of myself." His accent was deep Alabama, musical almost, but I could hear the determination underneath. I still remember that first lesson. The boy couldn't write a proper sentence, but he could do complex arithmetic in his head faster than I could on paper. "Who taught you numbers?" I asked. "Nobody taught me," he said. "Just comes natural when you're counting cotton." The way he said it, matter of fact, no self-pity, told me everything I needed to know about what kind of person he was. Those tutoring sessions became the highlight of my week. Harold didn't mind. "Charitable work looks good for the store," he'd say, not bothering to look up from his newspaper. 3 afternoons a week, Marcus would appear on my porch and we'd work through English, history, science. The boy soaked up knowledge like the parched Georgia clay soaks up rain. Things weren't easy for him at school. The other children were cruel, called him names, mocked his Alabama accent, his second-hand clothes. One day he showed up with a split lip. "Fell down," he mumbled when I asked. I knew better, but I also knew pushing wouldn't help. Instead, I lent him my copy of Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. When he returned it 2 weeks later, his eyes had a new fire in them. "Miss Evelyn," he said, "I'm going to be a doctor someday. Don't matter what nobody says." I believed him. That's the thing. I really, truly believed him when nobody else did. Not even his mama, who loved him fierce, but couldn't imagine such dreams coming true. Not in the South. Not in 1955. Not for a boy with skin the color of coffee. For 2 years, those tutoring sessions continued. Marcus advanced 3 grade levels in reading. He devoured every book I could get my hands on. I smuggled textbooks from the white school when I could. Their cast-offs were still better than anything the colored school had. I taught him Latin roots for medical terms. He taught me about perseverance. Then came that awful spring day in '57 when everything changed. Marcus wasn't on my porch at our usual time. Instead, his mama appeared, eyes red from crying. "Mr. Jackson been killed," she said, her voice hollow. "Tractor accident at the Wilkins farm." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Marcus's father, gone. Just like that. "Marcus says to tell you he can't come for lessons no more. We can't keep the rent without his daddy's pay. Moving in with my sister in Macon." I ran inside and grabbed every book I could find, plus $20 from my secret emergency fund hidden in my sewing basket. When I pressed it into her hands, she tried to refuse. "It's not charity," I insisted. "It's an investment in your boy's future." She finally took it, her dignity intact. The last book I gave her was a medical dictionary I'd been saving for Marcus's birthday. Inside, I wrote, "Your future is waiting for you out there. Never stop learning." It was signed, Miss Evelyn, and just like that, Marcus was gone from my life. I never got to say goodbye. I pictured him riding in the back of some pickup truck, headed to Macon, all his belongings in a cardboard suitcase, dreams temporarily derailed by the harsh realities of life. The years passed. Harold drank more, talked less. I kept teaching, finding other students with potential, but none quite like Marcus. Sometimes I'd wonder what became of him. Had he managed to continue his education? Had life beaten the dreams out of him? In my lowest moments, I feared he'd ended up another statistic, another bright light snuffed out by a world that didn't want to see colored boys succeed. In 1968, Harold died of liver failure. I was 42, childless, and finally free. The neighbors all expected me to wear black and fade into respectable widowhood. Instead, I cut my hair, applied for the position of school principal, and scandalized the town by wearing bright colors to church. For the first time in my life, I answered to no one but myself. Little did I know, somewhere out there, a young man still carried my words with him. A young man who would one day return and turn my carefully constructed life upside down in ways I never could have imagined. But that's getting ahead of myself. Life has its own timing, and some seeds take decades to bloom. The late 60s and early 70s were a time of change, even in our sleepy corner of Georgia. Integration came to our schools, kicking and screaming. Some white families pulled their children out, starting what they called Christian academies that weren't about Christianity so much as keeping things separate. I stayed put at Oak Ridge Elementary, now just called Oak Ridge School, watching history unfold from my principal's office with its squeaky fan and perpetually dusty blinds. I remember the summer of '69, sitting on my front porch with a glass of sweet tea and a slice of peach pie, watching the moon landing on my brand new color television that I'd dragged out to the porch so Mrs. Abernathy next door could watch too. "Would you look at that?" she kept saying. "A man on the moon, Evelyn, in our lifetime." I couldn't help thinking about Marcus, wondering if he was watching too, if he still looked up at the stars and dreamed big dreams. Oak Ridge changed slowly. The 5 and dime became a $1 General. They paved Main Street. The old courthouse got a fresh coat of paint. My house stayed the same. white clapboard with blue shutters, hydrangeas out front that bloomed the color of the sky after a summer storm. I'd never been much for change myself, truth be told. My mama's china still sat behind glass doors in the dining room. Harold's hat still hung by the door, though I couldn't rightly tell you why I kept it there. Sundays meant church, fried chicken afterward with whoever needed company, usually widows like me, or young mothers whose husbands worked the Sunday shift at the paper mill. I kept my hair in a neat bob, wore sensible shoes, and became one of those women who holds a small southern town together, serving on committees, organizing bake sales, remembering everyone's birthdays. The kind of woman people call a pillar of the community at her funeral. "You ought to think about retiring, Miss Evelyn," folks started saying around 1975. I'd smile and change the subject. Truth was, I couldn't imagine life without my school, without my kids. I'd never had children of my own, something wrong with Harold's plumbing, though I took the blame publicly to spare his pride. The students filled that empty space in my heart. My favorites were always the ones nobody believed in, the shabby ones, the ones with too short pants and too old eyes. I kept a drawer in my desk filled with granola bars and clean socks, kept a record of which kids needed what, without ever making it obvious. In a small town, pride is sometimes all folks have left. One spring morning in 1980, I was in my garden, up to my elbows in dirt, planting tomatoes. At 52, I was still spry enough to work my own garden, thank you very much. My knees creaked a bit when I stood, but I could still outlast teachers half my age during field day. I heard a car coming up my gravel driveway, unusual for a Saturday. Wiping my hands on my apron, I turned to see a shiny black Cadillac I didn't recognize. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a suit that even I could tell cost more than a month of my salary. He stood there for a moment, looking at my little house like he was memorizing it. I squinted against the sun, wondering if he was lost, or maybe selling encyclopedias. "Can I help you?" I called out, one hand shading my eyes. He took off his sunglasses, and something about the way he moved triggered a distant memory. "Miss Evelyn?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth with just a hint of Alabama underneath. "Do you remember me?" I took a few steps closer, my heart suddenly racing for reasons I couldn't explain. And then I saw his eyes, serious and intelligent, taking everything in. Eyes I'd know anywhere. "Marcus," I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. His smile lit up his whole face. "It's me, Miss Evelyn." I stood there frozen, my gardening trowel still in my hand, dirt under my fingernails. 25 years had passed since I'd seen that skinny boy. The man before me was broad-shouldered and confident, with a touch of gray at his temples. But those eyes, those were the same. "You came back," was all I could manage to say. I promised myself I would someday. He held up a book, tattered and worn, its spine cracked from years of use. My medical dictionary. "I thought you might want to know what became of your investment." We sat on my porch drinking sweet tea, the same porch where I'd taught him all those years ago. The words tumbled out of him. How his mama had worked 3 jobs in Macon to keep a roof over their heads. How he'd finished high school working nights at a gas station. A church scholarship to Morehouse College. Medical school at Howard University, working his way through. Residency at a hospital in Detroit. And now, his own practice in Atlanta. "Pediatrics," he told me, pride evident in his voice. "I work with kids from neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. Kids nobody expects much from." I couldn't stop the tears then. They just came, rolling down my cheeks like summer rain. "I always knew you'd do it," I said. "That's just it, Miss Evelyn. You were the only one who did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, carefully removing a yellowed piece of paper. He unfolded it gently, like it was made of gold leaf instead of cheap notebook paper. I recognized my own handwriting immediately. "Your future is waiting for you out there. Never stop learning." I carried this with me through every all-nighter in med school, through every time I wanted to quit, through every person who told me I didn't belong. His voice caught. I kept it in my wallet during my first surgery. The enormity of it washed over me. How small actions can change the course of a life. how a few kind words can sustain someone through their darkest hours. "I came back to thank you," Marcus said, "and to see if you might like to have dinner sometime. I'm setting up a new clinic in Atlanta, but I'll be coming through Oak Ridge every few weeks." I smiled through my tears. I'd like that very much. Neither of us knew then how that simple dinner invitation would change both our lives forever. We certainly couldn't have imagined the scandal it would cause, the whispers that would follow us, or the happiness we'd eventually find. But that's how life works, isn't it? The biggest changes often start with the smallest moments. That first dinner wasn't anything fancy, just the Magnolia Diner on Main Street, where the blue plate special was country fried steak and the waitresses had called me honey since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I dressed up a little, put on my good pearl earrings, Harold's mother's, though I never much cared for her, fixed my hair nice. It had been a dog's age since I'd had dinner with a man who wasn't collecting Social Security. The moment we walked in together, I could feel the eyes. Small towns have a way of noticing things, especially things they aren't used to seeing, like the former school principal having dinner with a well-dressed black man. Mabel, who'd been waiting tables at the Magnolia since Moses was a baby, nearly dropped her coffee pot. "Evening, Miss Evelyn," she said, her eyes darting between us. "Your usual booth?" "That would be lovely, Mabel. This is Dr. Washington. He's an old student of mine, just moved back to Atlanta." Marcus extended his hand, which Mabel took after the briefest hesitation. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Miss Evelyn speaks highly of this place." "Doctor, you say?" Mabel couldn't help herself. "Yes, ma'am. Pediatrician." I watched Mabel's face soften just a touch. Nothing melts Southern suspicion faster than good manners and professional credentials. She led us to my usual booth by the window, handed us menus we didn't need. I'd memorized mine decades ago, and Marcus had already asked me what was good. "So," I said after we'd ordered, "tell me about this clinic you're opening." His face lit up like a Christmas tree. "It's in South Atlanta, area called Summerhill. Mostly working folks, lot of single mothers. Kids there don't get regular checkups, end up in the emergency room with things that could have been prevented." His hands moved as he talked, sketching invisible blueprints on the table. "We'll have 6 examination rooms, a small lab, space for a social worker and nutritionist, hoping to add dental services next year." "Your mama must be bursting with pride," I said. A shadow crossed his face. "She passed last year. Cancer. That's part of why I came back south. Wanted to be closer to where she was." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand without thinking. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. She was a fine woman." He turned his hand over, squeezed mine back. "She talked about you, you know, right up until the end. That white lady teacher," she'd say, "the one who believed in my boy." Something fluttered in my chest, like a bird testing its wings. I pulled my hand back, suddenly aware of the diner around us, of Mabel watching from behind the counter, of Mr. Peterson from the bank 2 booths over, not even pretending not to listen. Over peach cobbler and coffee, Marcus told me about his son, Timothy, 8 years old, smart as a whip. His wife had died in childbirth due to a negligent doctor who'd ignored her symptoms of preeclampsia. "That's another reason I started the clinic," he said quietly, "so other women don't suffer the same fate." By the time we finished dinner, word had already spread through town that Evelyn Harmon was entertaining a colored doctor at the Magnolia. I could practically hear the phone lines buzzing. In Oak Ridge, gossip traveled faster than light. Marcus walked me to my car, and I found myself wishing the evening wouldn't end. It had been so long since I'd had a conversation that stimulated my mind, that made me feel seen for who I truly was. "I'd like to see you again, Miss Evelyn," he said, standing a respectful distance away. "Perhaps next time I'm in town?" "I'd like that," I replied, suddenly shy as a schoolgirl. "And please, after all this time, just call me Evelyn." He smiled, opened my car door. "Good night, Evelyn." Over the next 6 months, Marcus came to Oak Ridge every other Sunday. Sometimes we'd have dinner at the Magnolia, other times I'd cook at my house, my famous fried chicken or pot roast. Occasionally, he'd bring Timothy along. That boy was the spitting image of his father at that age, all serious eyes and questions that went bone deep. I found myself digging out old books I'd saved, watching Timothy devour them just like his father had. Each visit, the space between Marcus and me grew more comfortable, filled with shared memories and new discoveries. I learned he played saxophone, loved baseball, and couldn't abide mushrooms. He discovered my passion for mystery novels, my secret ambition to visit the Grand Canyon, my habit of talking to my plants. We never put a name to what was developing between us. How could we? It defied categories. He was my former student, 25 years my junior, from a world entirely different from mine. And yet, when we talked, age and background fell away. We were just two souls who understood each other. One crisp October evening, we sat on my porch swing after dinner, watching the sun set behind Mrs. Abernathy's oak tree. Timothy had fallen asleep on my couch inside, surrounded by books. "Evelyn," Marcus said after a comfortable silence, "I've been offered a position at Emory University Hospital, teaching position with hospital privileges." "Marcus, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. "That's one of the best hospitals in the South. It would mean moving to Atlanta permanently. No more commuting from Macon." He looked at me, those serious eyes now holding a question. "I'd be closer to Oak Ridge." My heart did a little two-step. "That would be nice," I said carefully, not wanting to presume. Marcus took a deep breath. "The thing is, I can't stop thinking about you. When I'm in Macon, when I'm with patients all the time, I know it doesn't make a lick of sense. I know what people would say, are already saying, but I've never met anyone who understands me the way you do." The porch swing creaked gently as we swayed. Crickets sang in the grass. From inside, I could hear Timothy's soft snoring through the screen door. "Marcus," I began, not even sure what I was going to say. "You don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. I respect you too much to play games." I looked at this man beside me. No longer the boy I'd taught, but someone who'd carved his own path through a world determined to hold him back. Someone who'd returned to lift others up. Someone who looked at me and saw not just an aging small-town schoolteacher, but a woman with dreams and desires of her own. "I think about you too," I admitted softly, the words carrying more weight than their simple syllables suggested. That night, after Marcus and Timothy left, I sat alone in my living room, the ghost of Harold's disapproving stare following me from his portrait above the fireplace. What was I thinking? A relationship with Marcus would scandalize the town, risk his hard-earned reputation, invite judgment neither of us deserved. It was foolishness. And yet, for the first time in my life, I found myself not caring what others thought. At 52, I was finally learning what it meant to listen to my own heart. Christmas came to Oak Ridge that year in a flurry of twinkling lights and pine wreaths. The town square had its usual giant tree, though this year they'd splurged on those newfangled LED lights instead of the old-fashioned bulbs. Change comes even to the smallest places, I suppose. I'd been invited to the annual Christmas party at the Baptist church, same as every year since I could remember. Usually I'd bring my sweet potato casserole, make small talk with the same people I'd known my whole life, then head home early with a plate of cookies for breakfast the next morning. This year felt different. Marcus had invited me to spend Christmas Day with him and Timothy in Atlanta. I'd said yes without a moment's hesitation. "You're coming to the church party, aren't you, Evelyn?" asked Betty Parker, cornering me after the school's Christmas pageant. Betty had been the church secretary since the flood, and nothing happened in Oak Ridge without her knowing about it. "I'll be there," I assured her, adjusting my scarf. The school auditorium was always too warm during events. "Bringing anyone special?" Her eyes had that gleam that told me the rumor mill was working overtime. "Just my sweet potatoes, same as always," I replied, keeping my voice light. Betty wasn't satisfied. "Helen Jenkins says she saw your friend's car parked in your driveway, awful late last Saturday." I met her gaze steadily. Marcus was helping me hang Christmas lights. My ladder's not as steady as it used to be. That much was true, at least. What I didn't tell Betty was how we'd stood together afterward, my small hand in his large one, watching the colored lights twinkle against the winter sky. How he'd looked at me with those eyes that saw straight through to my soul and said, "Evelyn, I think I'm falling in love with you." How for the first time in my 60-plus years on this earth, I'd felt truly, completely alive. The church party was in full swing when I arrived, the fellowship hall festooned with garlands and candles. I made my rounds, greeting former students now grown with children of their own, exchanging pleasantries with the pastor and his wife. Every conversation felt like wading through molasses. Polite smiles that didn't reach eyes, questions about my health and whether I was feeling quite myself lately. I was at the punch bowl when I overheard it. Two women whose husbands served on the deacon board with Harold years ago. Disgraceful is what it is. At her age. And him being colored was her student. What would Harold think? Their voices dropped when they noticed me standing there, punch cup in hand. I nodded politely and walked away, my cheeks burning not with shame, but anger. Harold would likely think the same small-minded thoughts they were thinking. That's one reason I'd never truly mourned him. I left early, drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The Christmas lights Marcus had helped me hang glowed softly as I pulled into my driveway. Inside, I kicked off my sensible shoes and poured myself a small glass of sherry, something I rarely did, but tonight called for it. The phone rang just as I settled into my armchair. Marcus, as if he'd sensed my distress from 40 miles away. "How was the party?" he asked after we'd exchanged hellos. "About what you'd expect," I sighed. "Small town, small minds." "I'm sorry, Evelyn." His voice was warm, concerned. "Maybe this is too much to ask of you." "What do you mean? Living under a microscope, the gossip, the judgment. You've spent your whole life in Oak Ridge. These are your people." "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "My people are those who respect me, who see me as a whole person, not as an extension of Harold or just the former school principal who should fade quietly into the background." I took a sip of sherry for courage. "My people are those who love me for who I am. And if you're not sure who I'm talking about, Dr. Washington, you might need to go back to medical school." His deep chuckle traveled through the phone line, warming me from the inside out. "I love you, Evelyn Harmon. I have loved you, I think, since I was 15 years old. Not romantically then, of course, but as the first person who ever saw potential in me. And now I love you as the extraordinary woman you are." Tears pricked at my eyes. "I love you too, Marcus. Lord help me, but I do." "Then let me ask you something. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. "Marcus, I know it's fast. I know people will talk, but life is short, Evelyn. My Clarissa died before we had a chance to really live. I don't want to waste another day pretending my happiness depends on what other people think." I thought about my neat, orderly life in Oak Ridge, the respect I'd earned over decades, the comfortable routines. And then I thought about the joy that had exploded into that life since Marcus's return. The conversations that stretched late into the night, the way Timothy's face lit up when I helped him with his science project, the feeling of Marcus's hand in mine. "Yes," I said, the word surprisingly easy. "Yes, I will marry you." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Marcus found a beautiful Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood in Atlanta, close to the hospital for him, with a garden for me and excellent schools for Timothy. I put my house in Oak Ridge up for sale, started packing away 50-plus years of memories, deciding what to take into this new chapter of my life. Word spread like wildfire. I'd expected shock, disapproval even. What I hadn't expected was the raw anger, the sense of betrayal some people expressed, The school board, where I still volunteered, suggested it might be best for all concerned if I stepped down. The church pastor paid me a friendly visit to express his concerns about the appearance of my relationship with Marcus. He's a respected doctor. For heaven's sake, I finally exploded during one such conversation, and we're both consenting adults. But he was your student, Evelyn, said Clara Wilson, who'd been my friend since first grade. A colored boy you taught when he was just 15. People are wondering things. And if you're feeling this story so far, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more real-life stories that'll hit you right in the heart. That's when I understood. In the mines of Oak Ridge, I wasn't marrying Dr. Marcus Washington, the accomplished physician who'd overcome tremendous odds. I was marrying my 15-year-old colored student. Never mind the 25 years in between. Never mind that he was now 40, a respected professional, a father. The narrative had already been written, and it cast me as either predator or fool. The day I noticed the word "nugger lover" spray-painted on my mailbox, I called the real estate agent and told her to accept the offer we'd received, even though it was well below asking price. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked that night, his face tight with anger after I told him about the mailbox. We could wait. Give people time to come around. I touched his face, this man who'd brought such unexpected joy to my life. I've spent my entire life in that town, Marcus. I've given them everything. My youth, my energy, my care. I taught their children, served on their committees, brought casseroles when they were sick. If they can't see past their prejudice to wish me happiness now, then it's their loss, not mine. I'm ready for our new beginning. 2 weeks later, a moving truck pulled away from my house on Magnolia Street. I stood in the empty living room one last time, running my hand along the wallpaper I'd chosen 30 years earlier. So many memories within these walls. Good and bad, joy and sorrow. But walls don't make a home. People do. Ready? Marcus asked from the doorway, Timothy peering curiously around him. I nodded, taking one last look around. Ready. We married in Atlanta that spring, a small private ceremony in the garden of our new home. Timothy was the ring bearer, solemn and proud in his little suit. Marcus's colleagues from the hospital attended, along with a handful of my true friends who'd made the drive from Oak Ridge. Clara came, though she sat stiffly through the ceremony, her disapproval evident in the tight line of her mouth. Still, she'd come, and that meant something. The azaleas were in full bloom, painting the garden in shades of pink and white. I wore a simple blue dress, not white, I was too old for such pretensions, and carried a bouquet of hydrangeas that matched my eyes. Marcus looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his smile so bright it outshone the Georgia sun. I, Marcus, take you, Evelyn, he said, his voice steady and sure. To be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. As we exchanged vows, I felt decades of conforming to others' expectations fall away. For the first time in my life, I was following my heart without reservation, without calculation of what others might think. The freedom of it was intoxicating. At the small reception afterward, Timothy tugged at my dress. Does this mean I call you Mom now? I knelt down to his level, this beautiful boy who'd already claimed a piece of my heart. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Timothy. I'll answer to just about anything except late for dinner. He giggled, then grew serious again. I don't remember my real mom. I know, sweetheart, and I would never try to replace her, but I promise I'll love you and take care of you the very best I can, for as long as I live. He seemed to consider this, then nodded gravely. I think I'll call you Mama Evelyn. Is that okay? I blinked back tears. That's more than okay. That's perfect. Our new life in Atlanta took shape like a patchwork quilt, pieces of his world and mine stitched together into something new and beautiful. I volunteered at Timothy's school, joined the garden club in our neighborhood, made new friends who knew me only as Dr. Washington's wife, not as the woman who'd scandalized a small town. Marcus's clinic thrived, serving children who might otherwise have fallen through the cracks of the healthcare system. I'd often stop by with home-baked cookies for the staff and stickers for the children. Sometimes I'd read stories in the waiting room, continuing my teaching career in an unexpected way. Our house became a home, filled with books and music and the sound of Timothy's laughter. We planted hydrangeas in the front yard, blue ones like the ones I'd left behind in Oak Ridge. On weekends, we explored Atlanta together, visited museums, attended Timothy's Little League games. Marcus taught me to appreciate jazz. I introduced him to bird watching. We discovered a shared love of classic films and would stay up late watching Bogart and Bacall after Timothy was asleep. And at night, in the privacy of our bedroom, I discovered another kind of freedom. The joy of being truly loved, desired, cherished. The difference in our ages melted away in those intimate moments. We were simply Evelyn and Marcus, two people who'd found each other against all odds. For 3 years, life was as close to perfect as I'd ever known it. Then came the letter from the Oak Ridge School Board. I'd kept up with news from home through Christmas cards and occasional phone calls from the few friends who hadn't cut ties. I knew my old house had been bought by a young couple from Atlanta, that the Magnolia Diner had closed after Mabel retired, that the town was slowly shrinking as young people left for bigger cities. But I'd put Oak Ridge firmly in my past, or so I thought. The letter was addressed to Mrs. Evelyn Washington, an acknowledgement of my new name at least. It was formal, typed on official letterhead, bearing the signatures of people I'd worked alongside for decades. Dear Mrs. Washington, it began, it has come to our attention that you have expressed interest in establishing a scholarship fund for underprivileged students at Oak Ridge High School. I frowned, looking up at Marcus, who was reading over my shoulder. I never said anything about a scholarship. He shrugged, equally puzzled. Keep reading. While we appreciate your long service to our district, we regret to inform you that the board has unanimously decided to decline your generous offer. The circumstances of your departure from Oak Ridge and the nature of your current marriage have created significant concerns about the appropriateness of maintaining such a visible connection between yourself and our student body. The letter continued, but the message was clear. We don't want your money, and we don't want our students associated with you. The final paragraph twisted the knife deeper. Furthermore, it has been brought to our attention that you have been contacting current Oak Ridge students through social media, offering educational guidance. We must insist that you cease all such communication immediately, as it could be misconstrued given your history. I set the letter down, my hands trembling with rage. Social media? I barely know how to use the Facebook account Timothy set up for me. The only student I've talked to is Jenny Miller, Clara's granddaughter, who reached out to ask about college applications. Marcus's face was a mask of controlled anger. They're trying to paint you as some kind of predator. But why now? It's been 3 years. We're happy. We're not bothering anyone. Because someone wants to hurt you, he said simply. Someone can't stand the thought of you being happy with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter had reopened wounds I thought had healed. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Marcus, and went downstairs to make chamomile tea, my mother's remedy for troubled nights. As the kettle heated, I noticed Timothy's school project spread across the dining room table, a family tree he was creating for his social studies class. He'd carefully drawn branches for Marcus's side, including his first wife Clarissa and relatives back to his great-grandparents in Alabama. On my side, he'd listed my parents, my grandparents, even Harold, with a small note, Evelyn's first husband, deceased. Tears blurred my vision. This was my family now, this beautiful, loving home we'd created together. What right did Oak Ridge have to try and taint it with their small-minded prejudice? The kettle whistled, and I felt Marcus's arms encircle me from behind. Couldn't sleep either, he murmured against my hair. I leaned back into his embrace. They can't let go, Marcus. They're still trying to punish me for loving you. No, he said, turning me to face him. They're trying to punish you for being brave enough to defy them, for proving that their narrow view of the world isn't the only one, for being happy when they thought you'd be miserable. I looked up into his face, still handsome at 43, the gray at his temples more pronounced now. What should we do? We could ignore it, or we could fight back. His expression softened. But it's your hometown, Evelyn, your history. You should decide. I thought about Oak Ridge, the good and the bad, the students I'd taught over decades, some of whom now had grandchildren in those same classrooms, the church that had rejected me after a lifetime of faithful service, the friends who'd stood by me and those who'd turned their backs. And I thought about Timothy's family tree, the legacy we were creating together. I want to fight, I said finally, not for myself, but for the next teacher who sees potential in a child everyone else has written off, for the next couple who loves across boundaries others find unacceptable, for Timothy so he knows his Mama Evelyn doesn't back down from bullies, no matter how respectable they pretend to be. Marcus smiled, that same determined smile I'd first seen on a 15-year-old boy, with dreams too big for the small town that tried to contain him. Then we fight, he said simply, pulling me close. Together. Fighting back meant returning to Oak Ridge. The very thought made my stomach knot with anxiety, but Marcus and I agreed. We needed to confront the rumors head on. So on a sweltering Saturday in July, we drove the familiar highway back to the town I'd fled 3 years earlier. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, reaching across the console to squeeze my hand. We were just passing the Welcome to Oak Ridge sign, its paint peeling at the edges. The town looked smaller somehow, as if it had shrunk in my absence. "I'm fine," I said, though the tremble in my voice betrayed me. "Just strange being back." We'd left Timothy with Marcus's cousin in Atlanta. No need to expose him to whatever ugliness might await us. Our first stop was the Oak Ridge Gazette, the weekly newspaper that had chronicled town happenings since 1892. If rumors were circulating about me contacting students inappropriately, we wanted to know the source. The Gazette office was housed in the same brick building on Main Street where it had always been, though the storefront next door, once the town's only bookstore, now stood empty, a for lease sign in the dusty window. The bell above the door jingled as we entered, announcing our arrival to the nearly empty office. Edward Simmons, who'd taken over as editor when his father retired, looked up from his computer. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed as he took in Marcus, standing beside me. "Evelyn," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "This is a surprise." "Hello, Edward," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "This is my husband, Dr. Marcus Washington. We'd like to speak with you about some concerning rumors that have been circulating." Edward's gaze flicked to Marcus, then back to me. "I'm afraid I'm rather busy at the moment." "This won't take long," Marcus interrupted, his voice polite but firm. "And I believe it's in everyone's interest to clear things up quickly." Something in Marcus's tone, or perhaps his imposing presence in his crisp button-down and slacks, made Edward reconsider. He gestured toward 2 chairs across from his desk. "What can I do for you folks?" he asked, folding his hands on the desk. I placed the letter from the school board in front of him. "Someone has been spreading lies about me contacting current students inappropriately. Given your paper's role in town communications, I thought you might know something about it." Edward scanned the letter, his expression unreadable. "I haven't published anything about you, Evelyn." "But you've heard the rumors," Marcus pressed. Edward sighed, removing his glasses to polish them with his handkerchief, a gesture so reminiscent of his father, it momentarily threw me. "Look, it's a small town. People talk." "People lie," I corrected. "I've never contacted any student except Clara Wilson's granddaughter, who reached out to me for college advice with her grandmother's knowledge. The school board seems to think otherwise." "Based on what evidence?" Marcus asked, his doctor's precision evident in the question. Edward looked uncomfortable. "I understand there was a Facebook message, something inappropriate sent to a senior boy." "That's impossible," I said firmly. "I barely use Facebook, and I certainly haven't messaged any boys. Someone is impersonating me or fabricating screenshots." Edward replaced his glasses, studying us with the practiced neutrality of a career journalist. Why would anyone do that after all this time? That's what we'd like to know, Marcus said. And who? Edward's gaze lingered on Marcus, assessment in his eyes. Whatever he saw must have impressed him, because his expression softened slightly. I'll look into it. Can't promise anything, but if someone's deliberately spreading false information, people should know. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Our next stop was harder, Clara Wilson's house on Sycamore Street, where I'd spent countless afternoons drinking sweet tea and planning church socials in another lifetime. Clara answered the door herself, her face registering shock, then something like guilt when she saw us standing on her porch. She'd aged in the 3 years since my wedding, her once auburn hair now fully silver, new lines etched around her mouth. Evelyn. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? Hello, Clara, I said, suddenly aware of how much I'd missed my oldest friend despite everything. This is Marcus. I believe you met briefly at our wedding. Clara nodded stiffly in Marcus's direction, but didn't invite us in. We stood awkwardly on her porch, the July heat pressing down like a physical weight. Clara, has Jenny been telling you I've been contacting other students besides her? I asked directly, too tired for social niceties. Clara's eyes widened. What? No, of course not. Then why would the school board think I've been inappropriately messaging students? A flush crept up Clara's neck. I don't know anything about that, but she did. I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes, in the nervous fluttering of her hands. Clara, I said gently, we've known each other since we were 6 years old. You've never been able to lie worth a damn. She glanced anxiously over her shoulder into the house. You shouldn't have come here, Evelyn. It's not a good time. When would be a good time to clear my name? I asked, an edge creeping into my voice. When would be a good time to stop people from calling me a predator? The door opened wider, and I found myself face to face with Reverend Townsend, the Baptist minister who'd once asked me not to attend his church anymore. His presence in Clara's house in the middle of the afternoon raised questions I wasn't prepared to contemplate. Mrs. Washington, he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. I thought I heard your voice. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued elsewhere. With all due respect, Reverend, Marcus interjected smoothly, this conversation concerns false accusations against my wife. Since you're here, perhaps you could shed some light on the situation. The Reverend's face hardened. I don't appreciate your tone, Dr. Washington. And I don't appreciate someone slandering my wife's reputation, Marcus replied, his voice remaining even. Especially someone who claims to be a man of God. The tension on the porch was thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. The Reverend's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Clara, I said, ignoring the Reverend entirely, Jenny is a bright girl with a promising future. I've only ever wanted to help her, just as I tried to help all my students. If you've heard anything suggesting otherwise, I hope you'll remember our friendship is built on 56 years of truth. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Evelyn, That's enough, the Reverend interrupted. I think you should leave now, before I call the sheriff. Marcus took a step forward, his presence suddenly filling the small porch. On what grounds, Reverend? We're having a peaceful conversation with an old friend. Marcus, I murmured, touching his arm. It's all right. We're leaving. As we turned to go, Clara called after me. Evelyn, wait. She glanced at the Reverend, then back at me, something resolving in her expression. Tomorrow, meet me at the old elementary school playground, 10 o'clock. I nodded, hope flickering to life. Clara had been my friend longer than she'd been a deacon's wife or a church secretary. Maybe that still counted for something. We spent the night at a chain hotel on the outskirts of town, neither of us willing to stay at the Oak Ridge Inn where everyone would see our car parked outside. Over dinner at the adjoining restaurant, we debriefed. Someone orchestrated this, Marcus said, his fork pushing pasta around his plate. The timing, the specific accusations, it's too deliberate. But why now? We've been gone for 3 years, living our own life. I'd barely touched my chicken marsala, my appetite lost to anxiety. Maybe that's exactly why. Marcus set down his fork, reaching for my hand across the table. Because we're happy. Because we've proved them wrong. I thought about Clara's face when she'd seen us on her porch. The shock, yes, but also the shame. And something else I couldn't quite define. I think Clara knows something, I said slowly. I just hope she's brave enough to tell us. That night, in our anonymous hotel room with its floral bedspreads and generic artwork, I lay awake listening to Marcus's steady breathing beside me. Tomorrow we'd face whatever truth Clara had to offer, and then, what? Return to Atlanta and our peaceful life? Fight a prolonged legal battle to clear my name? I didn't know which path was right, only that Marcus would walk it with me, his hand steady in mine. The thought was comforting enough that I finally drifted off to sleep. My last conscious thought, a prayer that tomorrow might bring clarity, if not closure. The old elementary school playground looked smaller than I remembered. The swing set rusted at the joints, the merry-go-round removed, probably deemed too dangerous by modern safety standards. I sat on a bench under the oak tree where I'd once monitored recess, watching generations of children play tag and hopscotch and jump rope. Marcus had offered to come with me, but I'd asked him to visit his clinic site instead. This conversation with Clara needed to happen woman to woman, friend to friend, without any outside pressure. She arrived precisely at 10, punctual as always, carrying a leather-bound Bible, her constant companion for as long as I'd known her. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from carrying secrets. "Thank you for coming," I said, as she sat beside me, leaving a careful space between us. Clara nodded, her hands fidgeting with the worn edges of her Bible. "I shouldn't be here." "But you are." "Yes." She took a deep breath. "Because 56 years of friendship should count for something, even if I don't, even if I can't. Even if you don't approve of my marriage," I finished for her. "It's not just that, Evelyn." Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "It's what people are saying." "What exactly are they saying, Clara? And who started it?" She looked around nervously, as if expecting to find someone watching us from behind the playground equipment. "There's a Facebook account, with your name, your picture. It's been sending messages to boys at the high school, inappropriate messages." My blood ran cold. "That's not me, Clara. Someone created a fake account." "I know," she said, surprising me. "At least, I know now." But at first, when the rumors started, she trailed off, shame coloring her cheeks. "You believed them," I said flatly. "After 56 years of friendship, you believed I would prey on children." "No," Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Not exactly. I wondered if maybe you'd had some kind of breakdown. After everything with Marcus, moving away so suddenly." "Clara, I moved away because someone spray-painted a racial slur on my mailbox. Because people I'd taught and nursed and prayed with for decades couldn't accept that I fell in love with a black man." She flinched at my bluntness. "It wasn't just that he's colored. It was the age difference, and him being your former student." "My former student from 25 years earlier, a respected doctor with a child of his own." My voice rose and I forced myself to take a steadying breath. "Clara, Marcus is the best man I've ever known. He's kind, brilliant, devoted to helping others. He loves me in a way Harold never did, sees me as a whole person, not just a convenient wife. And yes, there's an age gap. Yes, our skin colors are different. But our values, our hearts, those match perfectly." Clara was silent for a long moment, staring down at her Bible. "I miss you," she finally whispered. "The church sewing circle isn't the same without your stories. The Christmas pageant was a disaster last year. Nobody could remember how you organized all those shepherds." A small, sad smile flickered across her face. And my peach cobbler never comes out as good as yours. I felt a lump in my throat. I miss you too, Clara. But Reverend Townsend says— I don't care what Reverend Townsend says, I interrupted firmly. I care what you say, what you think, what you know in your heart to be true. Clara's fingers traced the gold cross embossed on her Bible cover. He says your marriage is an abomination. And what does the Bible say about bearing false witness against your neighbor? About judging others? She looked up then, really looked at me for the first time since she'd arrived. Are you happy, Evelyn? Truly happy? Yes, I said without hesitation. Happier than I've ever been. Marcus and Timothy. They're my family, Clara. My real family. She nodded slowly. I saw the Facebook messages. Mabel Wright's grandson received one. It didn't sound like you. Too many spelling errors for one thing. I knew you'd never write your when you meant your. Not my Evelyn who used to mark up my letters with red pen. Despite everything, I laughed. You knew it wasn't me because of grammar? A smile tugged at Clara's lips. Well, that and the fact that you once made poor Tommy Jenkins write inappropriate 50 times after he used a curse word in his essay. The messages spelled it inappropriate every single time. We shared a moment of genuine amusement, a brief return to the easy friendship we'd once had. Do you know who's behind the fake account? I asked when the moment passed. Clara's smile faded. I have my suspicions. She hesitated, then seemed to make up her mind. Yesterday, after you left, I did some investigating. Called my grandson at Georgia Tech. He knows all about computers. He found something. She pulled a folded paper from her Bible. The fake account was created from an IP address at the church during Thursday evening prayer meetings. I took the paper, scanning the technical details I didn't fully understand. The church? But that could be anyone. Not anyone attends Thursday prayer meetings in July, just the dedicated few, the Reverend, Deacon Parker, myself, and— She hesitated. Sarah Townsend. The Reverend's wife? I was genuinely surprised. I'd known Sarah for years. A quiet woman who seemed permanently overshadowed by her bombastic husband. She never forgave you, Clara said quietly. For what? I barely knew her. For helping Marcus, for seeing his potential when others, including her husband, saw only a poor colored boy who didn't know his place. Clara's voice had hardened. The Reverend was school board president back then, remember? He tried to block Marcus's nomination for that state scholarship, said it should go to a more deserving student. The memory came back in a rush. The heated school board meeting, my impassioned speech about Marcus's academic brilliance, the narrow vote that ultimately supported his nomination. A nomination that had helped pave his way to college. That was 30 years ago, I said, stunned. Some people have long memories, especially for perceived slights to their pride. Clara reached over and took my hand, the first physical contact between us in 3 years. The Reverend controls this town now. The church, the school board, even the paper. Edward Simmons won't print anything without the Reverend's approval. They've been spreading these lies, Evelyn, and God help me, I stood by and let them. He didn't just have one son. He had 2. Maybe more. If you want to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe now. Why are you telling me this now? Because you were right. 56 years of friendship should mean something, and because— She squeezed my hand. I saw your face yesterday when you talked about your husband. I know love when I see it, Evelyn. Real love. The kind Jesus talked about. And I've been a coward for far too long. Clara stood, straightening her skirt with trembling hands. I'm going to the sheriff today. I'll tell him everything, about the fake account, about Sarah, about all of it. It might not change everyone's minds, but the truth needs to be told. I stood too, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. Clara, the Reverend will never forgive you. She smiled then, a smile I recognized from our girlhood. Slightly mischievous, surprisingly brave. Maybe not, But I'll finally be able to forgive myself. She hesitated, then added, and maybe, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me too, I could come visit you in Atlanta sometime. I'd like to meet your Timothy properly. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the years of estrangement melt away. Our door is always open to you, Clara. Always. As she walked away, her shoulders straighter than when she'd arrived, I felt a weight lift from my own heart. Not everything was resolved. The damage to my reputation might never be fully repaired in Oak Ridge, but the truth would be told. And sometimes, that's enough to start healing. I pulled out my cell phone to call Marcus, eager to share this unexpected turn of events. As I dialed, I noticed a text from him. Found something important. Meet me at your old house, ASAP. Curious and slightly concerned, I made my way to Magnolia Street, to the white clapboard house with blue shutters that had been my home for most of my life. What could Marcus possibly have found there? And why did his message sound so urgent? The answer was waiting for me on the front porch. Marcus, looking both triumphant and troubled, standing next to a familiar figure I never expected to see again. The man standing beside Marcus on my old porch was older, grayer, stooped with age, but I recognized him immediately, Reverend James Miller, who'd been pastor of Oak Ridge Baptist before Townsend took over. He'd retired to Florida 15 years ago, and I hadn't seen him since. "Evelyn," he said, his voice raspier than I remembered but still warm with genuine affection. "You're a sight for sore eyes, child." Despite being in my mid-50s, I'd always be child to Reverend Miller, who'd baptized me when I was 8 and counseled me through my mother's long illness when I was in my 30s. "Reverend Miller," I breathed, climbing the porch steps. "What on earth are you doing here?" "Your husband found me," he said, glancing at Marcus with obvious respect. "Called the retirement community where I live, said it was urgent. I drove up first thing this morning." I looked questioningly at Marcus, who wore an expression I'd come to recognize, the one he got when he'd made a breakthrough diagnosis after hours of careful investigation. "I've been doing some digging," Marcus explained. "After what happened at Clara's yesterday, I knew we needed more than just our word against Townsend's. So I started making calls, talking to people who knew you before you left Oak Ridge." "Most wouldn't give him the time of day," Reverend Miller interjected, shaking his head sadly. "This town has changed, and not for the better. But a few remembered me, passed along my number." "Reverend Miller has some information that might help us understand what's really happening here," Marcus said, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture of support. "The current owners of my old house, the young couple from Atlanta, were away for the weekend, according to their neighbor. But they'd given Marcus permission to use the porch when he explained the situation. We settled into the wicker furniture that they'd kept from my time there, the familiar creak of the old rocking chair bringing back a flood of memories. "Start at the beginning, James," Marcus prompted gently, and I realized they'd been talking long enough to move to first-name basis. Reverend Miller nodded, folding his gnarled hands in his lap. "It goes back further than you might think, Evelyn. Back to when Marcus was your student." I glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "Townsend wasn't Reverend then, just a deacon with ambitions. He and Harold were close, both on the church-building committee, both with certain views about the natural order of things." The old man chose his words carefully. "When you started tutoring Marcus, Harold complained to Townsend about it." "Harold never said a word to me," I said, surprised. "He seemed completely uninterested." "Oh, he was interested all right, just not in speaking to you directly about it." Reverend Miller sighed. "Harold came to me too, wanted me to tell you to stop. Said it wasn't proper, a white woman spending time alone with a colored boy, even if it was for education. I refused, told him you were doing the Lord's work, helping a child in need." "That couldn't have gone over well," Marcus commented. "No, it did not." The old reverend chuckled without humor. "Harold started working to have me removed after that. Took him a few years, but eventually he and Townsend gathered enough support. That's when I retired to Florida." "I had no idea," I said, stunned. "Harold never mentioned any of this." "He wouldn't. Not his way." Reverend Miller's eyes were kind, but sad. Harold liked to work behind the scenes, pull strings without being seen. But what does this have to do with what's happening now? I asked, trying to connect these decades-old events to our current situation. Everything. The Reverend leaned forward. When Marcus returned to Oak Ridge as a successful doctor, it challenged everything men like Townsend believe about the natural order. When you two fell in love, it was even worse. Proof that their worldview was fundamentally wrong. But why target Evelyn specifically? Marcus asked. Why fabricate these horrible accusations? Because she was the catalyst, Reverend Miller said simply. In their minds, without Evelyn's intervention, Marcus would have remained in his place, another poor colored boy with limited prospects. She disrupted the order they believe God intended. The pieces began falling into place, not just the recent accusations, but the cold shoulders, the whispers, the entire campaign to drive me from the town I'd called home my entire life. There's more, Reverend Miller continued. After you two left, Townsend consolidated his power. The church, the school board, even the town council. They're all filled with his people now. Oak Ridge is shrinking, businesses closing, young folks leaving. But Townsend's influence only grows stronger over those who remain. Like a cult, Marcus murmured. Not far from it, the old Reverend agreed. He preaches a gospel of fear, fear of change, fear of outsiders, fear of losing what little they have left, and he needs enemies to sustain that fear. So he made us the enemy, I said, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. You especially, Evelyn, the insider who betrayed them, the respected teacher who chose love over tradition. Your happiness threatens everything they've built their identity around. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this revelation settling over us, the magnitude of what we were facing, not just individual prejudice, but a systematic effort to destroy my reputation, to punish me for daring to love across boundaries they deemed sacred. What do we do? I asked finally. How do we fight this? You already have allies, Reverend Miller said. Your friend Clara, for one. Edward at the newspaper. His father was a good man, and the son has more backbone than Townsend realizes. And there are others, quietly questioning, looking for leadership. I spoke with Edward this morning, Marcus added. After I called Reverend Miller, showed him some evidence we've gathered about the fake Facebook account. He's considering running a story, with or without Townsend's approval. It won't be easy, Reverend Miller warned. Townsend won't give up his power without a fight, and some minds may be too far gone to change. I don't need everyone to accept us, I said, reaching for Marcus's hand, just for the truth to be known, for the lies to be exposed. Truth has a power all its own, the old Reverend nodded, like water on stone. Given time, it will wear away even the hardest resistance. As if summoned by our conversation, a car pulled up to the curb, Clara's old Buick. She emerged, looking flustered but determined, clutching a manila folder. When she spotted us on the porch, her pace quickened. Evelyn, I've been looking all over for you. She hurried up the steps, nodding a greeting to Marcus, and stopping short when she recognized Reverend Miller. Oh, my stars, Reverend, what are you doing here? Same as you, I suspect, he smiled, trying to set some things right. Clara held up the folder. I went to the sheriff like I promised, showed him everything, the IP address information, screenshots of the fake messages. Her face fell slightly. He was hesitant, said he'd need to consult with the district attorney before taking any action. Sheriff Thompson is Townsend's brother-in-law, Reverend Miller explained to Marcus. But then, Clara continued, her voice strengthening, I went to see Mabel Wright. Her grandson was one of the boys who received messages from the fake account. She was furious when I showed her the evidence that it wasn't really you. Said her grandson nearly lost his football scholarship over the whole mess, refusing to respond to what he thought were advances from his former principal. Mabel's always had a strong sense of justice, I said, remembering the straight-talking waitress who'd served us at the Magnolia Diner for decades. She made some calls, Clara said, a hint of satisfaction creeping into her voice, To other parents. They're gathering at the church right now, demanding answers from Reverend Townsend. Then that's where we need to be, Marcus said, standing. Are you sure? I asked, suddenly anxious. It could get ugly. Marcus helped Reverend Miller to his feet with gentle deference. Truth deserves witnesses, Evelyn, and you deserve to face your accusers directly, with your head held high. Clara reached for my hand. I'll be right beside you. As will I, Reverend Miller added. It's time Oak Ridge remembered what true Christian love looks like. As we made our way to the cars, I glanced back at my old house one last time. The new owners had planted roses where my hydrangeas once grew, painted the shutters a cheerful yellow instead of blue. Change wasn't always a loss. Sometimes it was simply a different kind of beauty, taking root where you least expected it. Ready? Marcus asked, holding the car door for me. I nodded, suddenly calm in the face of the confrontation to come. Ready. The Oak Ridge Baptist Church stood as it always had. White clapboard with a modest steeple, surrounded by ancient oak trees that had witnessed generations of weddings, funerals, baptisms, and confessions. Today, it would witness something else entirely, a reckoning. Cars filled the parking lot, more than I'd seen outside the church, except on Easter Sunday or the annual Christmas pageant. As Marcus parked along the street, I could see people streaming through the double doors, faces set with purpose. Word travels fast in a small town, Clara observed from the back seat. Especially when Mabel Wright is doing the talking, I added, a smile tugging at my lips despite my nerves. We made our way toward the church, Reverend Miller leaning slightly on Marcus's arm. The July heat pressed down, the air thick with humidity and tension. A few heads turned as we approached, whispers rippling through the small groups gathered on the lawn. Mrs. Washington. The voice belonged to a young man jogging toward us, Mabel's grandson Tyler, star quarterback and, according to Clara, one of the recipients of the fake messages. He'd been a first grader when I was principal, all missing teeth and untied shoelaces. Tyler, I acknowledged, preparing myself for whatever might come. He stopped before us, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Ma'am, I want to apologize. When I got those messages, I should have known they weren't from you. You never would have written something like that, and you taught us better than to believe stuff without checking facts. The simple sincerity in his voice nearly undid me. Thank you, Tyler. That means a great deal. Gran's inside, he continued, nodding toward the church. Said to tell you she's saved seats up front. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Said you'd need a good view of the show. Inside, the church was buzzing with conversation, the usual respectful hush replaced by an energy that crackled like static electricity before a storm. Mabel waved from the third pew, her formidable bulk clearing plenty of space around her. We made our way forward, conscious of the eyes following our progress, the conversations that faltered as we passed. "'Bout time you got here,' Mabel greeted us, pulling me into a hug that smelled of hairspray and peppermint. "They're all in the pastor's study, emergency deacons meeting, trying to figure out how to put out the fire." She nodded toward a door beside the pulpit. "What exactly is happening, Mabel?" I asked as we settled into the pew. "Justice, that's what." Mabel's eyes gleamed with righteous indignation. "Clara showed me what they did, making a fake account in your name, sending filth to my grandson and others, using the church computer to do it in the Lord's house." She shook her head in disgust. "I called every parent, showed them the evidence. Nobody messes with our kids, not even a reverend." The door to the pastor's study opened, and Reverend Townsend emerged, followed by several deacons, including Betty Parker's husband. They looked grim, their usual air of authority noticeably diminished. Reverend Townsend faltered momentarily when he spotted us, his eyes widening at the sight of Reverend Miller beside me. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice not quite as steady as usual, "thank you for coming on such short notice. It seems there have been some misunderstandings that need clarification." "Cut the fancy talk, Reverend," called a voice from the back. Mr. Davidson, whose son had also received messages. "We want to know who's been sending inappropriate messages to our boys using Mrs. Washington's name." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Reverend Townsend's collar seemed to tighten around his neck. "An investigation is underway," he said, attempting to regain control. "Until then, we should avoid jumping to conclusions." "The IP address came from this church," Clara interrupted, standing. "During Thursday prayer meetings, when only a handful of people were present." She held up the papers from her folder. "Including your wife, Reverend." The murmuring grew louder. Reverend Townsend's face flushed dark red. "These are serious allegations without proof," he blustered. "I have proof," Edward Simmons called out, rising from a pew near the wall. He held up a USB drive. "Security camera footage from the church office shows Sarah Townsend at the computer during prayer meeting last Thursday. The timestamps match when messages were sent to Tyler Wright." I felt Marcus stiffen beside me, his hand finding mine in silent support. This was escalating faster than any of us had anticipated. "Where is Sarah?" someone called out. "Let her speak for herself." Reverend Townsend's composure cracked further. "My wife is at home, unwell. This is a baseless attack on a godly woman." "Is it baseless, William?" Reverend Miller's voice cut through the chaos, quiet but carrying. He stood with some effort, his aged frame still commanding respect. "Is it truly baseless? Or is it the natural culmination of years of fostering hate and division in this congregation?" A hush fell over the church. Many present remembered Reverend Miller from his years of service, his gentle guidance through their marriages, births, and losses. "James," Reverend Townsend said stiffly, "this is no longer your church." "No," the older man agreed, "but they are still my people, and you have led them astray." "I've upheld traditional values. You've twisted scripture to serve your prejudice," Reverend Miller corrected. "You've used God's word as a weapon instead of a balm. You've taught fear instead of love." I stood then, unable to remain silent any longer. I taught in this town for 30 years, served this church for decades. When I found love, true, respectful, God-given love, with a good man who happened to be younger than me and black, you didn't rejoice with me. You drove me away. And when that wasn't enough, you or your wife tried to destroy my reputation by preying on innocent boys. Reverend Townsend's eyes narrowed. "You corrupted a student." "I taught a student," I corrected firmly. 25 years later, as grown adults, we fell in love. There's no corruption in that, only blessing. Marcus stood beside me, his presence calm and dignified. "I was 15 when Miss Evelyn first showed me that my mind mattered, that my dreams had value. I was 40 when we met again, a widower with a son. Everything between us has been honorable, respectful, and honest. More than I can say for what's happened here." "The question remains," Edward Simmons pressed. "Who created the fake account? Who sent those messages? And who authorized the school board letter falsely accusing Mrs. Washington of inappropriate contact with students?" All eyes turned to Reverend Townsend, whose authority seemed to be evaporating by the second. Before he could respond, the church doors opened, and Sheriff Thompson entered, followed by his deputy and, to everyone's surprise, Sarah Townsend. She looked small, diminished somehow, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling. "I've come to confess," she announced, her voice barely audible in the sudden silence. "I created the account. I sent those messages. William knew nothing about it." Her gaze found mine across the crowded church. "I did it because you were happy, because you found love that crossed every boundary we'd been taught to respect, because your happiness made our sacrifices look like what they were, empty and pointless." The raw honesty of her confession stunned the congregation into silence. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only profound sadness for a life so consumed by bitterness that another's joy became unbearable. Sheriff Thompson looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Townsend has agreed to come to the station to make a formal statement," he announced. "This is now an official investigation into identity theft and harassment of minors." "She needs help, not punishment," I found myself saying, surprising even myself. "Counseling, not handcuffs." Marcus's hand tightened around mine. Pride, support, love, all conveyed in that simple pressure. Sarah's gaze met mine again, confusion replacing hostility. As the sheriff escorted her out, Reverend Miller addressed the stunned congregation. "Today is a day for truth, however painful. But truth without compassion becomes another kind of weapon. Let us remember that redemption is possible for everyone, even those who have caused harm." People began to gather in small groups, processing what they'd witnessed. Some approached us, former students, parents I'd worked with, neighbors from my street, offering awkward but sincere apologies, asking questions about our life in Atlanta, admiring Marcus's accomplishments. Not everyone, of course. Some slipped out silently, uncomfortable with the shifting ground beneath their feet. Change comes slowly to places like Oak Ridge, one heart at a time. As we prepared to leave, Mabel caught my arm. "You coming back to visit more often now?" "Tyler's starting college in the fall, pre-med. Says he was inspired by Dr. Washington's story." I glanced at Marcus, who nodded slightly. "Yes," I said, "I think we will." Outside, the July sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the church lawn. Clara walked us to our car, her face lighter than I'd seen it in years. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "your hydrangeas are still blooming behind your old house. The new owners kept some of them after all." I smiled, understanding the metaphor she was offering. Some roots run too deep to be easily removed, some bonds too strong to be permanently broken. Like the connection to my hometown. Complicated, imperfect, but still mine. 20 years have passed since that day at the Oak Ridge Baptist Church. I'm 87 now, my hair completely silver, my hands marked with the gentle terrain of age spots and wrinkles. Marcus is 60, his own hair peppered with gray, laugh lines etched around his eyes, evidence of a life well lived, of joy freely expressed. We're sitting on the back porch of our Atlanta home, watching Timothy's children play in the yard, our grandchildren in every way that matters. The oldest, Clarissa, named for Marcus's first wife, is headed to medical school in the fall. The middle boy, James, named for Reverend Miller, who passed 10 years ago, wants to be a teacher. "Like Grandma Evelyn," he always says, making my heart swell with pride. I survived the lie, and I found peace. If this story touched you, hit subscribe. Let's keep these real voices alive. So much has changed since that confrontation in Oak Ridge. Sarah Townsend received the help she needed, therapy instead of jail time, as I'd hoped. She and Reverend Townsend eventually divorced, a scandal that rocked the small town but ultimately proved liberating for her. Last I heard, she was working with a women's shelter in Savannah, finding purpose in helping others break free from oppressive situations. Reverend Townsend resigned from Oak Ridge Baptist 6 months after the incident, his authority irrevocably damaged. The church called a young pastor from Atlanta, a progressive voice who slowly began healing the divisions that had festered for so long. Change didn't come overnight. There was resistance, departures, hard conversations. But gradually, the congregation rediscovered what it meant to truly love one's neighbor. Clara became one of our most frequent visitors in Atlanta, making the drive every other month to spend weekends with us. She and Timothy formed a special bond. She taught him to make her famous pound cake. He showed her how to use the internet. When she passed 5 years ago, we scattered her ashes in the rose garden behind the church, where she'd tended flowers for 60 years. Mabel's grandson, Tyler, did go to medical school, inspired partly by Marcus's story. He completed his residency at Marcus's clinic, now a full-fledged community health center serving South Atlanta. Today, he runs it, carrying on the mission Marcus began all those years ago. Marcus still consults there 1 day a week, mentoring young doctors who, like him, are determined to provide quality health care to underserved communities. As for Oak Ridge itself, the town has changed, as all places must. Many of the small businesses closed as larger retailers moved into surrounding areas. The paper mill shut down, taking dozens of jobs with it. But there's been rebirth too. A small tech company established offices in the old mill building. Young families from Atlanta, seeking more affordable housing, have begun moving in, bringing new energy and perspectives. We visit several times a year now. The initial awkwardness has faded with time, replaced by a kind of respectful acceptance, if not complete understanding. We stay in a small bed and breakfast run by one of my former students, attend services at the Baptist church when we're there on Sundays, have dinner at the new cafe that replaced the Magnolia Diner. Our presence still raises some eyebrows, but the whispers have largely stopped. Timothy married a lovely girl from Oak Ridge, ironically, Betty Parker's granddaughter, bringing our story full circle in ways no one could have predicted. Their wedding in the Oak Ridge town square 5 years ago felt like a kind of healing, a bridge between past and future. Even some of our former critics attended, offering cautious congratulations, perhaps finally seeing that love transcends the boundaries we so carefully construct. Marcus reaches over now, taking my hand as we watch the children play. His touch is as comforting as ever, a constant in a world of change. "What are you thinking about, Evelyn?" he asks, his voice deepened with age, but still carrying that hint of Alabama warmth. "Everything," I reply. "The journey. How a small-town school teacher and a poor boy from Alabama ended up here, with all this." I gesture to the yard, the grandchildren, the life we've built. "Would you change anything?" he asks, though he already knows my answer. "Not a single moment," I say with certainty. Not even the hard parts, because that's the truth of it. Every struggle, every whisper, every accusation made what we have now possible. Without the hostility we faced in Oak Ridge, we might never have built our life in Atlanta. Without the confrontation at the church, the town might never have begun its slow journey toward greater acceptance. Without Sarah's confession, she might never have found her own path to healing. Sometimes I think about that first day Marcus appeared on my porch after 25 years away. How different my life would have been had he never returned, had I settled into a quiet, respectable widowhood as everyone expected. I would have missed so much joy, so much love, so much growth. People still ask about our story, at church gatherings, community events, family reunions. They're curious about the scandal, of course, but more than that, they want to understand how we weathered it, how we remained steadfast when so many forces sought to drive us apart. Love, I always tell them. Not just romantic love, though that's part of it. Love as a choice, as a daily commitment to see the best in each other, to stand together against whatever comes. Marcus has a different answer. Courage, he says. Evelyn's courage first, to believe in a poor colored boy when no one else did. Then my courage, to return and thank her. Our shared courage to choose happiness over acceptance, truth over comfort. We're both right, I suppose. Love without courage becomes sentimentality. Courage without love becomes mere defiance. Together, they formed the foundation that has supported us through 40 years of marriage. The youngest grandchild, little Evelyn, my namesake, toddles over now, arms raised in the universal request to be lifted. Marcus scoops her up, settling her on his knee with practiced ease. At 3, she sees nothing unusual about her grandfather's dark skin against her grandmother's pale hands. To her, we're simply Grandpa and Grandma, sources of cookies and stories and unconditional love. That, perhaps, is our true legacy, not the scandal or the vindication that followed, not even the professional accomplishments we've accumulated between us, but this: children who grow up seeing difference as natural, who learn that love comes in countless forms, all of them valid, all of them worthy of respect. The sun is setting now, painting the Atlanta skyline in shades of gold and pink. Timothy calls the children in for dinner, and Marcus helps me to my feet, his hand steady beneath my elbow. My knees aren't what they used to be, but then few things are, except what matters most. "I love you, Evelyn Washington," Marcus says, kissing my cheek. "Today and always." And I love you, Dr. Washington, I reply, our decades-old exchange as familiar and comforting as a favorite sweater. Today and always, together, we make our way inside to join our family. The family that began, improbably, with a 15-year-old boy who needed help with his studies and a 27-year-old teacher who believed in his potential. A family forged across decades and differences, strengthened by challenges, sustained by love. They say that truth is stranger than fiction. In our case, it's also infinitely more beautiful. The headline that once scandalized a small southern town, "Teacher marries former 15-year-old student," tells only the smallest fraction of our story. The rest is written in the lives we've touched, the barriers we've helped dismantle, and the love that proved stronger than prejudice, stronger than fear, stronger even than time itself. I wouldn't change a thing, not a single precious thing.